All right, welcome back to the On Texas Football, live edition of On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howell. He's CJ Vogel, recapping the Steve Sarkisian press conference and player availability. Coming off of a 35-10 loss to Georgia, looking ahead to Saturday's game against Arkansas. This edition of On Texas Football is brought to you by our friends over at Duck Camp. Duck Camp makes gear for folks who live for being out there, whether out there is in a duck-blinded sunrise or on the 40 acres for a Saturday kickoff. Born right here in Austin, Duck Camp builds best-in-class hunting and fishing apparel that works just as well for a full day in the field as it does for a long day of tailgating. From sun protection shirts to keep you cool during the early season scorchers to their iconic game series hats that feel like instant classics. Duck Camp gear is ready for football season, hunting season, and every season in between. Get out there, stay out there, and hook 'em. Shop Duck Camp at duckcamp.com and on Texas Football Family. Use the code ONTEXAS25. That's ONTEXAS25 for 25% off of your order at duckcamp.com. CJ, we started the morning with Sean Miller. We're not here to talk about men's basketball, even though tomorrow night, 8 o'clock against Rider, they are back on the court. This is about Sark and Texas coming off of a loss to Georgia. And CJ, it was a little tense in that press conference today, but Sark, the answering of difficult questions has already started, and you could tell he was ready for him. I don't know what else to add on to this, CJ, other than I didn't think we would hit the point this season where it became this uncomfortable, but here we are.
Yeah, it's certainly been a roller coaster, right? And, a 25-point loss on the road on national television to a top 5 team. And when you had your season on the line and a week to prepare for it, well, you're going to have to answer some tough questions. And for Steve Sarkisian, they came today. He certainly said that's not really where he envisioned this game going. And for 3 quarters, he felt like it was a back and forth, kind of the way that he anticipated this game to go. And then things got really out of hand. So, I think right now Texas's tail is kind of tucked between its legs. And again, we've heard it since that game was over in Athens. Sarkisian now trying to get his team prepared for the next 2 weeks, and then seeing how the dominoes may lie, whatever life is available left in the college football playoff. That's what their hope is, winning out the next 2 and seeing how the chips fall after that.
CJ, and again, here's how I handle the press conferences. I may not agree with everything Sark says, and I don't, but at least on 95% of the stuff he's told us since he got the job, I appreciate that he at least lets you in on his thought process. Like abandoning the run, he didn't come out and say it, but he alluded to something that Rod and Jerry and I hit on the live stream last night. The only logical explanation was, hey, he didn't like the way the defense played. He expected a shootout, so he felt like he had to match scores and try to generate explosives, and that was going to be by throwing the ball, not running it. And CJ, he said something to that effect. It was in that realm. What did you like today, CJ, and what bothered you just in terms of Sark's frame of mind right now?
Of course, with a head coach, and what we've seen from Sark pretty often this year is the look ahead and the preparation for the big game ahead. And Texas has 2 rivalry games coming up. He said, look, you have to be prepared for Arkansas. And he's not hiding the fact that that is a scary team offensively. And given what we know about Texas and defensively their woes, it's going to be a scary matchup on Saturday. Whether Texas fans like it, it's 11-point difference according to Vegas at the moment. But you just don't look like a team that can beat anyone by 10 points or more at the moment, Jeff. And what I did not like is you kind of ducked the preseason expectations question part of it. You once again did mention that you didn't feel like you abandoned the run when very clearly that was the case. And again, I feel like there's a lack of accountability right now when it comes to needing and requiring the physicality to win in the SEC at the level in which Texas hopes to do so.
Yeah, I appreciate, the fact that, like I said, that he lets you in on his thought process. You may not agree with it, but I do appreciate that aspect. I think the thing that it continues to irk me is the penalty situation. He was asked about the penalties, and again, kind of, I don't want to say deflected, but he pushed back on that a little bit, and I guess wanted a better form of the question asked. But CJ, there's no reason Texas is getting penalized an average of 8.2 times per game. That is dead last in the Power 5 and next to last in FBS. There's no reason for you to be, as Austin points out in the chat, there's no reason for you to be 133 out of 134 teams in the FBS in penalties per game. That's just, there is no way to sugarcoat that. That is just flat out unacceptable, and you just need to own it.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It is incredibly unacceptable, but that's who this team has been the entire season, right? You don't get to 133 out of 134 off of a few bad weeks. If you do, that's because they're historically bad. And Texas,
Yeah.
on a given weekend, hasn't been historically bad. They've been very consistent around 7 to 10 to 12 penalties. And that's, you go back to Ohio State. Penalties allowed 7 points on the board for Ohio State. It took points off of the board for you. You look back at this past weekend, it was just setting Texas up time and time again to put points on the board. You lose the game in Florida, penalties were a big part of it. It's been a consistent theme, and the fact that it hasn't been addressed to the level in which you would expect penalties this poorly to be addressed is an issue, and it starts from the inside.
Yeah, I think that is an off-season change that has to take place. And look, I don't think that you just fire coaches and make those changes that boom, the switch automatically flips. I think the look Sark has to make in the mirror is you've got to look at what are you emphasizing in meetings, what are you emphasizing in practice, how do you hold guys accountable for mistakes. But CJ, that's something, if it wasn't going to get fixed this season, it's not going to get fixed in 2 weeks. That's something that they've got to deal with during the offseason. But I think the big thing coming out of this press conference is the cut we're going to get to right now. Sark was asked about this team underachieving this year. And look, at this point, when you start the year ranked number 1 in the preseason, fair or not, you're voted by the media to win the SEC and picked by the coaches to win the league, fair or not. There are a certain set of expectations. You haven't met those expectations. You're not going to meet those expectations in all likelihood. This was Sark's response, CJ. Let's get to it, and then we'll break it down afterwards.
The main reasons are this team is underachieved.
According to who?
Well, when you're preseason number 1, I think most people would agree 3 losses is not achieving what you are capable of.
I mean, I guess that's into who voted us number 1, okay? What I think is that this team has competed their tail off. They've been faced with a lot of different adversity and injuries, and a lot of stuff has come across this team's plate. And I'm very, very proud of them with their resiliency. At the end of the day, at the University of Texas, we're held to a very high standard. And the standard is to compete for championships year in and year out. And we're going to play the best teams in the country. We're going to schedule the best teams in the country. But by the end of the season, we'll play, of our 12 regular season opponents, 5 of those teams will be top 10 teams when we play them, so nearly half our schedule. And we have an opportunity at the end of the regular season to do something that nobody's done since 2019, and that's beat 3 top 10 ranked teams in the regular season. The last team to do that was LSU with Joe Burrow. So have we been faced with a pretty difficult schedule? Have we been faced with high expectations? Sure, but that's why we came here. So we'll be okay.
CJ, I've said this all year. When head coach and players, going back to the spring, all throughout the summer, media days leading up to the season, when you're openly talking about winning a national championship, competing for a national championship, winning an SEC championship, being in the hunt, and, when you talk about roster management or load management, whatever it is, you're playing the long game. You expect to be playing deep into December and January. When you don't do that, you just have to own it. And I don't mind the second part of Sark's response there, but how he handled it to start with is why everybody's going to ignore the second part and just look at that first part.
Yeah, I didn't like the answer. It has been a very underachieving season, and for the most part, it's been on the side of the ball in which Sarkisian has his fingerprints all over, right? So you come into the year, 25 draft picks in 2 years, back-to-back college football playoff appearances, while preaching the standard is the standard. Well, the standard's been set, and that standard is that you're competing for a national championship. Right now, you're the 17th best team in the country, according to the AP, and I'm sure the committee will have you somewhere in that exact same area. Only 12 make it to the playoff. So right now you're out. If you don't make it to the college football playoff, that is a failure. You're, again, the preseason number 1 team. You're the only team in the country to go to back-to-back playoffs. This is all because of the standard that has been set in Austin. So to not acknowledge that, hey, so far through 10 games, it's been an underachieving season, I think is a pretty big oversight. But altogether, look, Texas can still win out. They can still achieve something that no one since LSU has done. Does that guarantee that they'll be in the college football playoff? No. And still, by the standard that's been set by Texas over the last 2 years, it would be quite a big failure, quite a big underachievement.
Yeah. we'll get to we got a super chat actually from Bobby's Mayo Spreader. Thank you for the super chat. It says, here goes Sark Herman, winning is hard. James Sarkland. Look, I mean, CJ, the bottom line is, you and I talked about in the quick reacts after the game on Saturday, that win over Nick Saban, you're getting further removed from it, and you haven't had one since over a top 5 opponent. You're 0-7 against top 5 AP opponents since then. And, look, I know everybody's, having jokes at Sark's expense right now. And you're right. He's right for the criticism. When you put a product on the field that looked like the one you had on Saturday, Steve Sarkisian is a better football coach than Tom Herman. I firmly believe that. As far as the James Franklin comparisons, I want to get your take on this, CJ. I said this and this goes bigger picture. I said this on the live stream last night, and I really believe this. I think this version of Steve Sarkisian Texas football, I think it's hit its ceiling, and it needs to be retooled. And look, every coach that's had a sustained run anywhere, it happened to Mac Brown. Mac had a couple of times where he had to kind of reinvent it and reboot. I think Sark is at that point. And I don't think just firing a bunch of coaches is the answer, but I think you need to take an across the board look at what's going on in your organization, every part of it, and see, is this good enough for us to go win a national championship? And if it's not, you need to make appropriate changes. I just don't know where you sit on that, because if you don't make the necessary changes, you will be in that James Franklin camp.
And look, the conversation's getting a little louder, right? You're 0-7 against the best coaches in the country right now with comparable talent. It's been a while since Texas has won a game like that, and it's frustrating. And for Sark to even say a week ago that this was a college football playoff team, and now say, well, look, we haven't underachieved this season, I think is very, in a way, contradictory of one another. But no, it's something that Sark's going to have to look in the mirror, because again, for him, and I always hear the stories, Jeff, you can probably tell it a little bit better than I am, about after Texas played Alabama in 2009. They come back out the next season. That offense looks much different. It's much different than what Texas had been doing that had made their offense so successful in the past. That, again, I was only about 12 or 13 at the time. Sorry. So I can only imagine that's kind of what this year had felt like. Texas, with its spread, with its speed, throwing the ball around the yard, and in turn, opening up the front 7 to allow for 5 to 7 yard gains, to keep that running game going, even when that wasn't a strength, to now be, hey, we're going to condense everything. We're going to go to 12 personnel. We're going to run between the tackles and get under center. That feels like a miscalculation. And it starts with Steve Sarkisian. It starts with that offensive staff saying, hey, we messed up early in the season. We need to fix this. And it's not been fixed, right? It's not been fixed to the point in which you can run the football for more than 10 attempts with your running backs against a team like Georgia. It just is a clear abandonment of what you thought this team would be, and the right corrections have yet to be made. So look, you have 2 weeks left to make those corrections and adjustments. Does that mean your season will be salvaged and you can find a way into the playoffs? Sure, it could, but you're going to need a lot of help elsewhere, and that should not be the place where Texas is right now, given the preseason expectations and talent on this roster.
No, and I'll echo something Jerry mentioned recently, because it's true. And look, I saw it with Mac, I saw it with Charlie Strong, I saw it with Tom Herman. The idea of just firing coaches sounds great on paper, but once you start firing guys and just making change for the sake of making change, man, at some point, if those moves don't work out, at some point there only becomes one person left to fire, and that's the head coach. So I don't think that's necessarily the deal. And when I talk about changes in the offseason, I'm not talking about necessarily you may need to move on from some assistant coaches. I don't know. I think you've got to take a good, long, hard look at it. But CJ, again, to me, it goes back to the penalty situation. Like, how are you teaching it? How are you holding guys accountable for it? What are you doing to correct it? The run game issues, which we'll get to that here in just a second. Why is it that your running game is getting worse every year? Do you need to change the way you practice it a little bit? Have your running back and offensive line evaluations been off? Do you need to take a look at what talent you're acquiring in the portal for those positions? Is it schematics? So many different things go into it. And again, I just think it bears repeating. And I want to get to, I apologize, I'm trying to search for who asked the question. Christopher Weatherford says, the entire Longhorn media and fan base as a whole are spoiled again after a couple of years. Craziness, peeps calling for Sark's job is laughable. Who would be next? Let me get this straight. I'm not calling for Sark's job. I don't think firing Steve Sarkisian by any stretch is the answer or what Texas should do. But at the same time, CJ, this goes back to the cut we just heard. When your trajectory is upward and you spend all off season talking about winning a national championship and competing for a national championship, and you get another crack at Georgia, and it's arguably the worst of the 3 losses that you've had, you have to answer for that in the court of public opinion.
Yeah, especially the way that it happens, right? And what's probably most concerning is look at how and when all of these 3 losses this year have occurred, right? Your offense scored 7 points. Your offense barely struggled to reach 21 points. And your offense, again, in the first half against Georgia was shut out, right? Only 10 points on the board this past week. And your offense has been very, very poor in the 3 losses. And you had a whole summer to plan for Ohio State. You had a whole bye week to play Florida. Oh, and you also had a full bye week once again leading into Georgia. That's the frustration for me, is when you look in the mirror, I think a lot of that does start with Steve Sarkisian, knowing, hey, your offensive game plans, quite frankly, have not been good enough. And yes, Texas needs to execute better. They need to pass better. They need to block better. They need to run better. They need to catch better. We all know this. But at some point, that all, continuously falls on the coaches for the same issues occurring time and time again.
And CJ, pass defense is one of those issues that it's reoccurring. And I thought this was fascinating. If anybody saw the live stream last night or watched second watch on the channel with Bobby and Rod, or was on the live stream last night with myself and Rod and Jerry, a lot of stuff Rod was talking about, and this is, again, why I love leaning on Rod Babers for football knowledge. A lot of the stuff Rod was coming to the conclusion was it was wrong with the pass defense. Sark said a lot of that stuff today. CJ, hey, do guys know where their help is? Well, if you don't know where your help is, you got to communicate that. If you know where your help is, why are you leveraging the football improperly? And he was talking about coverage bust. And CJ, I think that's it. That's part of the frustration is they are correctable, preventable mistakes that keep happening that are allowed. And again, like the coverage bust, man, we just haven't seen that from a Texas defense in a really long time, where you're just busting coverages at this higher rate and it's this blatant. And I know Cade Phillips is a young guy and I'm excited about him. He's going to get better, but something is amiss for it to keep happening over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's one thing when you look at 2023 and your season ends to one, I think we would all agree was one of the better quarterback performances they've seen with their own eyes with Michael Penix, right? Putting the ball right past outstretched arms and contested coverage when guys were just draped all over wide receivers, right? That happens. That's the game of football. Players make big-time plays, but you certainly can't allow those big-time plays to occur because of something that you've done wrong pre-snap or as the snap progresses, right? And that's what Texas has done too often. Busted coverages, communication not being there. We thought perhaps with Michael Taft and Jelani McDonald returning, communication wouldn't be an issue in the back end, and yet 3 of the 4 passing touchdowns that we saw Saturday evening came pretty wide open, right? They were all as the result of Texas just not being at the right place at the right time, and that has been very uncharacteristic over the last 3 years, but over the last 3 weeks, it's kind of become the norm. And against against Arkansas coming up, against Texas A&M, teams that can beat you with high explosive offenses, why am I to believe that it's going to be any better over the next 2 weeks, Jeff?
Yeah. Bobby's Mayo Spreader with another super chat. Again, thank you for the super chat. So we look bad. Sark hasn't beat anyone of substance on a consistent basis. There are many teams with less talent that do more. Why was Livingston or Mosley ever off the field? DBs are lost. I will push back on Sark hasn't beaten anyone of substance on a consistent basis. Look, you win 12 games 2 years ago. You win 13 last year. You're in the semifinals the last 2 years. You can't just completely discard that. Like, those things happened, and Texas had 2 really talented football teams. And you've got to give, if you want to blame Sark for when things go wrong, which he owns that, he also owns the credit, and his staff owns the credit, this organization does, for getting the roster in the right place for you to have that success. I will, though, CJ, on the second part of this, look, Ryan Wingo had 9 catches in the game, but he had 13 targets. That's one guy. You're kind of back to 2022 Xavier Worthy, where you've got one guy, as talented as he is, gobbling up a really large percentage of your targets. And just the way they're performing, they seem to be, and they being Livingston and Mosley, seem to be on the same page with Arch more often. The rest of the way over these last 2 games, I would like to see those 2 guys get a bigger share of the targets in a pass game.
Couldn't agree more. And I feel like I've been pushing that for quite a while, right? Early in the year, the only receiver that you saw consistently making plays when Mosley was shelved and, DeAndre Moore was sidelined for a few weeks was Parker Livingston. He's kind of gone by the wayside. Why? I couldn't tell you. But over the last few weeks, it's been Emmett Mosley. You go back to Mississippi State, some of the plays he made there, Vanderbilt as well. When he is given the opportunity to make plays on the football, more likely than not, good things occur. And so I certainly agree that those two deserve more looks. It makes me wonder because you go back to 21, right, Jeff, and you mentioned Xavier Worthy, where Texas was just feeding, and they didn't have any other options, right? It was Xavier Worthy. They didn't have a guy that they could look to as their number two consistently. Well, you've got guys now, and yet you're still force feeding, and the results aren't necessarily adding up. So we'll see what adjustments are made, but I'm with you. I think both of those guys have deserved and earned more opportunities to see the football.
Yeah, to your point, you go back to that 22 season. If you remember, Isaiah Nayer was the big portal acquisition who ended up getting hurt, and you didn't have him. And Jordan Whittington got banged up at one point, and your passing game was a miss. And I think the unfortunate thing with the pass game too, look, there's been a lot of times this season where the criticism of Arch Manning has been warranted. I think it's unnecessarily piling on by just a lot of people that maybe only watch Texas once or twice this season, but. Man, Arch Manning's played really well of late. Like, Arch is getting better. Like, you can see the game is slowing down. Even against Georgia, I felt under the circumstances, CJ, he handled the pressure and got the ball where it needed to be more often than not. I don't know if you threw it out, but I want to say his adjusted completion percentage, PFF and a couple other people put this out, and it's basically like on-target throws. There's 82%? I think adjusted completion percentage was in the 80s against Georgia. And again, drops were an issue. That to me is the unfortunate thing is, your receivers are having issues completing plays at a time where now your quarterback is consistently putting the ball in the right place. It's just kind of this offense in a nutshell this year, CJ. It's almost like you're springing different leaks on the boat. You fix one and then another one pops up. It just hasn't clicked consistently this season.
Now, I couldn't tell you one consistent aspect from week 1 to week 13 that we've seen with this offense other than penalties. And again, let that kind of sink in because it's an issue.
Arch's playmaking ability, I still think, is the identity of your offense, but we'll just shelve that for another time because we got a super chat. Jerry's Jack Links in the super chat says, has Sark ever fired a coach? Maybe Marion. No, Brennan Marion moved on. The only coach I think Sark has let go was Andre Coleman after year 1. Everybody else that's left the staff has either left for coordinator opportunities or left to go to the NFL. I mean, Bo Davis is the only coach that made a lateral move, but we know there was more to that deal than just a coach changing jobs. But no, I mean, and look, the good thing is, CJ, recently, when you win a conference championship one year, you have the best regular season record in the SEC. The next year, you're in the playoffs back-to-back years. You really don't need to fire anybody at that point. Things are good. And again, I just want to reiterate, I don't necessarily think that firing coaches is what's going to get this thing back on track to where Texas is, in the playoff next year or competing for a national championship next year. But it's just taking a look at the organization as a whole and making changes. But again, we could be here talking about that all day.
Yeah, certainly. And look, that's really where this year in particular becomes so frustrating is because the issues have sustained time and time again. And a lot of those issues, especially up front, right, have kind of lingered for a few years. And for Sark, I think winning kind of masks a lot of those issues. But when those issues come to light and you're starting to stack L's after L's, that's when changes need to be made. And this offseason is going to be really interesting.
CJ, I'm going to let you set up this cut, the second cut we got. And again, thanks to Matthew behind the scenes for putting these cuts together. You asked Sark about the run game, and just looking over the numbers, I mean, you're averaging about 72 yards a game in SEC play. You are dead last in the conference in rush yards per game in conference play. The run game, CJ, it's gotten worse every year. And you asked Sark about it today. I'll go ahead and let you set up this clip.
Yeah, look, you mentioned it. Texas dead last in the SEC. Last year they were top 5, more than double the amount of average yards per game on the ground that Texas was able to accumulate. And that's with the difference of playmaking ability, to your point, Jeff, with Quinn Ewers, with Arch Manning at quarterback, yet it doesn't matter, right? Your ability to pick up the quote-unquote easy yards on the ground have been very difficult. I asked Sark why that's been the case this year. Why haven't hasn't Texas been able to run the football effectively? He says it's accumulation of things.
I think that there's probably a combination of things. One, I felt like we were blocking well in the run game a year ago. I felt like we found a rhythm in the run game with Trey a year ago. I think Trey really hit his stride kind of the midpoint of the season, maybe the OU game last year. And those two combinations, I feel like we had real threats on the outside, with Matt and Isaiah and DeAndre was going and Gunner. And so I think people were deploying a little bit differently on us. And then ultimately there's a confidence from a play caller standpoint of where's the strength of your team and what are you trying to lean into to ultimately win. Last year we were really a shutdown defense, and you felt very confident about our ability to play defense and shut people down. I think sometimes this season, we haven't ran it the way we would have liked, and so are you comfortable going run and willing to live with third down and whatever that is, and third down and having to convert to stay on the field, knowing if you punt it, are you comfortable enough to go out there and shut somebody down? And so like the other night, Georgia's first 2 drives is 2 touchdowns is 14-3. And so where's your level of confidence of, hey, if we run, pass, we got a punt, how good do you feel about it not being 21-3 as opposed to 14-3? And so you sometimes you have to shift kind of your focus on how do you want to attack and what do you need to do. Now, credit to the other night, our defense started mountain stops and 3 and outs and things. And so games can take a trajectory that are different than others. But I think you have to look at it all. At the end of the day, we have to be better at running the ball. There's no question about it. Nobody's in our building thinking, hey, we're good. But we've got to find a way to do that. And whether that's schematically, whether that's personnel, whether that's, shrinking the plan, whether that's expanding the plan, there's a lot of ways to get that done. But we've got to find a way to gain yards on the ground to where we aren't just a one-dimensional football team.
CJ, there's a couple of things there that stood out to me, but the one thing that boils down to, I said this after the Florida game, and it's probably for good. There's a lot to get into it, but I think the bottom line, I don't think Sark trusts this offensive line. I don't think he trusts the run game, period. And I think and why would he, given the struggles Texas has had? It's just, you're kind of in a no-win situation at that point.
Yeah, I mean, he mentioned it right there. He said, I don't want to be in 3rd and long because we go run to waste plays. And I know that's not necessarily what he said, but reading through the tea leaves, that's probably what he meant, right? Otherwise, I think you would see more than 10 rush attempts in a game against a top 5 team when you were running the ball well to start. He just said, quite frankly, I couldn't risk having the running game put me even further into a hole because it couldn't gain yards to extend drives or put points on the board when I feel like my quarterback could do exactly that. So that's something that's going to need to be addressed, because it took 9 weeks, Jeff, for this team to find its best 5, in which it went through 4 or 5 different combinations already, in which you had 9 months previously to see it in practice every single day. You had the opportunity to know what the combination was, and it took only a few injuries before you realized what it was. That's area number 1 for Texas. And I thought Kirby Smart's comments after the game on Saturday were pretty damning, right? Physicality matters in this conference, and we know exactly what that looks like. We want guys that are here because they are physical. Texas right now, how physical are they? I would say not very. And for multiple years now, I think even with some production on the offensive line, how much of that really was because you had 2 or 3 NFL caliber backs in your backfield versus your offensive line was up there mauling people up front? I think the answer is you had some pretty talented backs. When they disappear, so does your running game.
Yeah, and look, if your running game needs, and let's not forget, Jonathan Brooks towards the end of 2023 was in that All-American Doak Walker conversation, but it might have been a first-round pick if he doesn't get hurt in that TCU game. But CJ, if you need first-round running backs for your running game to thrive, then you probably need to reevaluate it, because it can't be that personnel dependent.
Yes, correct. That's exactly where I'm going and more times than not, you see programs year in, year out. Like I think of the Wisconsins of the world, right? And Texas will never be Wisconsin. That's not who they are, but it doesn't matter who plays offensive line for them, right? They're going to run the football. They're going to own time of possession. That's who they are. They're going to outman you up front. Again, I'm not saying Texas is ever going to be Wisconsin, but they have a certain identity up front. And I don't think we've ever looked at this offensive line and under any of the 5 years and say, hey, their identity is creating running lanes for their guys or creating open holes or owning the line of scrimmage, even for that matter, right? Sacks have been an issue. Running against big-time competitive teams up front has been an issue. When does that change? How does that change? Yeah. That's what point number one for me is going to be really interesting moving forward.
Yeah, I'll reference your tweet, CJ. Texas has played 13 ranked teams since the beginning of 2024. The 3 games with the lowest amount of running back rush attempts are as follows: 10 at Georgia on Saturday, 15 versus Georgia in the regular season last year, and 21 versus Georgia in the SEC championship game last year. Going against a Kirby Smart defense is not the best time for your running game to crater.
No, not at all. And even adding to that stat, out of the 13 games that Texas has played against a ranked team, only 3 times has Texas averaged more than 5 yards per carry. Obviously, Clemson, Texas A&M, 2 of them. So something's got to change there, because 5 yards per carry, even against good teams, feels like it should be the baseline for what a team like Texas should be able to do.
Yeah, how much of this, because we're getting a lot of comments in the chat. Chat is fired up, obviously. I think, CJ, maybe the biggest thing, and I know people look at running back, but look, Trey Wisner, and I asked Clark Lee about it at SEC Media Days. He said, look, you run for 1,000 yards in our league, you're a really good back. And Trey Wisner's 1,000-yard back last year is a proven commodity. So I don't think it's just about getting a big bruising back. I think, CJ, the biggest thing is matching up your personnel on the offensive line with whatever you scheme up in the run game. And I don't see that right now. How quickly can you get that fixed remains to be seen. I think you've got some young pieces in the program. Look, Trevor Gooseby will be back next year. Brandon Baker will be back. Daniel Cruz may be taking another step. Connor Robertson's probably going to be back. So you've got some pieces, but are you asking those pieces to do things in conjunction with your run game schemes that are conducive to it succeeding is my question.
Yeah, and that's something that, again, should have been figured out before the season began. Why? Because you had 8 months since the conclusion of 2024 to figure out what the identity of this team could be, what the strengths and the weaknesses were, what your personnel could allow you to do. And yet, as we were talking about, it took too long in this season, and it feels like even then it was a bit of a wasted season in that regard to find what this team could be or do on the ground game. And that's a frustrating piece. Is, again, I'd like to echo what you said. You don't need the number one running back in the country to have a running game.
Yeah.
Teams should be able to run successfully with just run-of-the-mill guys.
And look, it's not like Sark got dumb all of a sudden. Like, he's had this run of 1,000-yard backs, which is most likely going to come to an end, barring something just massive down the stretch, going to come to an end this year. But, I mean, look, yes, he had Bijan Robinson, and Bijan was great. But, I mean, Bishop Sankey, Chris Polk, like, it's not like you just had a top-of-the-draft running back in all of those years. You've made it work. It just hasn't worked. And I don't, I see a lot in the chat about, oh, Sark is soft. And look, I don't think this program is soft. I don't think you play as well against the run typically as you do defensively, and you're soft. I don't buy into that wholly, but I do agree that Sark has to change a lot. And I'll ask you this, CJ, as we wind down. I don't know that Sark just handing off play calling to somebody is just the magic elixir that's going to fix it, because at the end of the day, you've still got a coach who is a play caller at heart. So honestly, for me, I would almost rather Sark hang on to play calling duties than pass it off to somebody and you're meddling so much that you didn't really fix the problem anyway. I know I'm looking at a worst case scenario, but I just don't think that's the easy fix that everybody assumes. A lot of people assume it might be.
Yeah, I tend to agree as well. And I don't know where the change comes. Is it strength and conditioning? Is it offensive line specifically? Is it technically or, fundamentally? How does Texas go about teaching those guys up front? All I know is you've continually seen the rise and the fall of this offensive line, and a level in which 5 years in, with all of your own guys that you've recruited, continually have the issues with guys that you didn't recruit. And so that tells me that there's a continual theme here of guys not achieving their ceiling, or the offensive line ultimately not becoming a strength of this team when it should be this deep into the tenure.
Yeah, I will admit this, CJ, as we wrap this up. I was dead wrong about the offensive line. And I know when we power rank position groups and talk about position groups, that group was probably at the bottom of the position groups in this program, but it had an opportunity to get better. I just grossly miscalculated the idea that, hey, Neto Amozolo was ready to assume the role at left guard, and moving Cole Hudson to center can probably anchor a little bit better than Jake Majors could, that you could have more of a power run game. I haven't been that wrong, CJ, about anything with this program in a really long time. That was just a gross miscalculation on my part. It's one thing for me to miscalculate it, CJ. It's another thing for the staff to miscalculate it.
Yeah, 100%. Again, these are guys that they see every single day in practice. This should be something that going into the season, you don't need to bench what should have been your starting left guard, right, the week before a game. You should know what your offensive line was capable, or at least the guys in the building were capable of. So, again, that's going to be priority number one, and whatever the next 2 weeks of the season entail, and whatever leads up to the 2026 season are, this needs to be corrected.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't even hardly talk about Arkansas, but we'll get into that on the channel throughout the week. And CJ will have more on the run game, I think, coming up later over at ontexasfootball.com. Thanks, everybody in the chat for participating, especially those that chimed in with Super Chat. CJ, thank you for the knowledge and expertise as always. Thank you to Matthew behind the scenes for producing it. Thank you to our friends at Duck Camp for sponsoring it. If you're not a member over at ontexasfootball.com, it's all right. You can get over to the site right now and sign up using the promo code OTFOG, and that'll get you 1 year of access for $39.95. Make sure that you like this video and that you're subscribed to the On Texas Football YouTube channel. That way, whether it's here on the channel or on the site, you're not missing any of our coverage before, during, and after every Texas game this season. For CJ, for Matthew, for the entire On Texas Football staff, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And until next time, welcome.